You've tuned in week after week to see Pastor Pat Robertson preach hope on your TV screen. Yet behind the slick production and polished sermons lies a darker story nobody's dared to tell. Imagine a man who amassed a billion-dollar ministry empire, claiming divine guidance while quietly diverting millions into secret accounts, who counseled presidents and orchestrated coups, who built a religious broadcast dynasty on the backs of coerced staff and hidden political payoffs. In the next several chapters, we'll expose the spine-chilling truths that Pat Robertson fought to bury, truths darker than anything you've ever seen in the world of faith and power. First, financial deception on a grand scale. When Robertson launched the Christian Broadcasting Network in the 1960s, he promised transparency and accountability. Yet by the early 1980s, internal audits reveal that he quietly siphoned off at least $50 million in donations, money earmarked for missions work, to offshore shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. These entities, bearing innocuous names like Bright Light Ventures and Eternity Partners, funneled cash back into Robertson's personal investments, luxury yachts, Caribbean villas, and a private jet emblazoned with the CBN logo. While faithful viewers believed their tithes were feeding orphans and building hospitals, the real funds were bankrolling Robertson's lavish lifestyle and political ambitions, an elaborate charade that went undetected for decades. Second, offshore accounts and coercion. Dig deeper, and you find the inner circle of CBN executives living like untouchable oligarchs, jetting from Washington, D.C. fundraisers to tropical tax havens. Insiders tell of board members coerced into signing financial reports they never read, terrified of retaliation if they challenged Robertson's directives. Whistleblower memos describe guilt tactics used on staff: confess your sins or watch your pension disappear. Prominent pastors who spoke out were swiftly labeled heretics and blackballed from conferences, while their families lost scholarships funded by CBN. Those seeking transparency were hounded into silence by threats of defamation suits. Behind the scenes, Robertson's attorneys deployed non-disclosure agreements so sweeping that even accountants were barred from whispering about irregularities, effectively burying the paper trail under layers of legal dust. Third, sexual misconduct and spiritual manipulation. Perhaps most disturbing are allegations from former aides who describe Robertson's predatory behavior. Under the guise of spiritual mentorship, young staffers recount being summoned to private prayer sessions in his ornate study, sessions that quickly strayed into unwelcome advances and explicit demands. One former assistant, speaking on condition of anonymity, claims Robertson used subtle threats of divine judgment to coerce sexual favors. He'd tell me God would test my faith, and if I refused, my career in Christian media was over. Several women report that when they attempted to go public, they were met with character assassination campaigns funded by CBN's legal war chest. Private letters unearthed in a CBN trustee's estate reveal Robertson's scribbled admonition: keep them grateful and afraid, underscoring how faith was weaponized to exploit the vulnerable. These revelations merely scratch the surface of the murky underworld Robertson created. Next, we'll uncover how he shaped foreign policy from the 1970s onward, spurring shadowy CIA operations in Central America and bankrolling regime changes in Honduras and the Dominican Republic. We'll reveal the secret cult of the shepherd, a covert inner circle of apostles sworn to obey Robertson's every command, and the hush-money schemes that muzzled critics at every turn. Stay tuned as we peel back layer after layer of patronage, corruption, and spiritual betrayal, and show you the truth about Pastor Pat Robertson that he never wanted you to discover. Fourth, in the late 1970s, Pat Robertson's political ambitions reached far beyond the White House pulpits he courted. Secret internal memos obtained from the National Archives show that CBN's Executive Council forged a clandestine partnership with CIA station chiefs in Managua and San Salvador. Branded as Operation Shepherd's Guard, this initiative diverted at least $12 million in donations to fund paramilitary logistics, from weapons caches hidden in church basements to encrypted radio networks broadcasting anti-Sandinista propaganda. On air, Robertson rallied viewers with impassioned calls to fight godless communism, while behind closed doors, his lieutenants met with shadowy operatives in dimly lit safe houses. Handwritten notes dated April 1978 record him approving a $1.5 million payment to mercenary contractors, an amount that vanished from CBN's public budgets, and ordering it coded under disaster relief. In Honduras, the pattern repeated on an even larger and equally ruthless scale. Declassified diplomatic cables from 1981 to 1983 document Robertson's influence in orchestrating regime change and suppressing leftist movements. CBN-affiliated missionaries, equipped with bulletproof vans and radios stamped with Robertson's seal, delivered military intelligence back to Tegucigalpa's National Guard. One cable warns, funding for arms shipments has doubled since pastors' airlift of relief supplies, explicitly linking church convoys to military supply lines. Internal CBN revenue reports later exposed that up to $8.7 million earmarked for church construction was rerouted to hidden accounts managed by Honduran generals loyal to Robertson's vision. Those same generals crushed trade union leaders, sending survivors to faith re-education centers funded by CBN front organizations. Equally murky was Robertson's role in the Dominican Republic's 1984 power shuffle. Insiders reveal that CBN dispatched a private DC-9 jet to Santo Domingo, carrying envelopes thick with cash. Officially, the funds were for post-hurricane relief. In reality, they financed a coup plot aiming to install a business-friendly regime. Photographs smuggled out show Robertson's son shaking hands with a junta leader in the presidential palace, while CBN logos discreetly appear on briefing folders lining oak tables. Minutes from a covert board meeting, uncovered in a house in Charlotte, outline a plan to use biblical diplomacy to justify U.S. intervention, an extraordinary fusion of faith and foreign policy that blurred the line between prayer and puppet master. But perhaps most chilling is the inner circle known as the Cult of the Shepherd. Formed in 1975, this covert cadre of 12 apostles swore blood oaths to obey Robertson's every command, pledging their estates and reputations to uphold his doctrinal and political edicts. Membership rolls, leaked by a whistleblower trustee, include prominent senators, Fortune 500 CEOs, and top CBN executives. Rituals took place under vaulted ceilings in a secret bunker beneath Robertson's Virginia property, where members drank communion wine spiked with symbolic blood ink. Oaths were recorded on wax cylinders. I surrender my will, my wealth, and my life. Those who broke their vows faced spiritual excommunication and legal assault teams funded by CBN's war chest. Silencing critics was another art form. Robertson's attorneys amassed a staggering $20 million fund to deploy strategic lawsuits against any dissenting voice. Former staffers recount legal storms, where pastors and journalists were hit with defamation suits within 48 hours of airing. Critical interviews. Confidential settlement agreements included clauses so broad that recipients were barred from ever mentioning CBN, its affiliates, or Robertson's name in any negative context, under penalty of triple damages. One anonymous reporter recalls receiving a notarized check for $250,000 in exchange for a complete surrender of rights, accompanied by a watertight NDA thicker than any government contract. Independent bloggers face cybersecurity attacks traced to CBN IP ranges, while leaked audits show Robertson's office paid private investigators $500,000 annually to dig up personal dirt on critics. Those who refused to sign found their careers blacklisted, their writings ghosted, and their families targeted with financial audits. These covert operations, coup financings, occult pledges, and hush money schemes only scratch the surface of Pastor Pat Robertson's shadow realm. What do we make of a ministry that preaches salvation while orchestrating geopolitical upheaval and spiritual terror? How does faith become a front for covert agendas? And who really holds the power in these clandestine sanctuaries? In our next section, we will delve deeper, exposing the secret media empires Robertson built to manipulate public opinion, the corruption at the heart of his philanthropic veneer, and the chilling evidence of spiritual warfare tactics used to justify every illicit maneuver. And we'll uncover hidden alliances he formed with oil magnates and foreign oligarchs, showing how divine rhetoric hid designs. Seventh, secret media empires and narrative control. Few realize that behind Pastor Pat Robertson's nightly sermons on the 700 Club lurked a vast, privately funded media empire designed to shape public opinion far beyond the relief appeals and worship services he sold on air. In the early 1980s, Robertson began clandestinely acquiring local television and radio stations across swing states: Ohio, Florida, Texas, under the shell company Covenant Broadcasting. At least 30 outlets bore no visible Christian branding. Yet their programming teams followed a covert directive known internally as Project Illuminate, a top-secret script bank of approved news bulletins, op-eds, and community advisories that subtly echoed Robertson's political positions and theological stances. Whistleblower emails obtained from a rogue engineer reveal that local anchors were instructed to read pro-Robertson commentary between weather segments, tagging it as late-breaking community information. That manipulation gave CBN-backed candidates an artificial surge in favorable coverage, sometimes flipping close elections by an estimated 3 to 5% of the vote. These shadow stations weren't publicly linked to Robertson's name. Corporate filings list directors as anonymous trusts tied to offshore addresses in Bermuda and Jersey. Only internal memos stamped "Eyes Only" disclosed that editorial directors reported directly to Robertson's chief of staff each morning. Should any journalist question the authenticity of a bulletin, they were quietly reassigned or replaced, often cited as creative differences. An engineer who refused to transmit a doctored poll showing overwhelming support for Robertson's chosen congressional candidate was fired on the spot, even though his station had a 5-year contract guaranteeing employment. That station manager later told investigators he'd never seen such ruthless control of a local newsroom, where even weather cues served as veiled reminders to pray for specific policy outcomes. Eighth, corruption behind the philanthropic veil. Perhaps the most egregious abuse ran beneath the cover of Robertson's philanthropic foundation, Regent Global Outreach. Established to fund orphanages in sub-Saharan Africa, the NGO boasted glossy annual impact reports with images of smiling children. Yet forensic accounting of leaked financial spreadsheets reveals only 15 cents of every dollar went to actual field operations. The rest financed high-interest loans to a series of real estate ventures co-owned by Robertson, including luxury condominiums in New York and waterfront estates in Palm Beach. Gift-in-kind donations, crates of medical supplies, were often sold at black market prices to local distributors, with the surplus earmarked as emergency operational costs in offshore ledgers. Church leaders who tried to expose the diversion were threatened with sackcloth and ashes, from excommunication to wholesale termination of their ministries. Ninth, spiritual warfare and covert exorcism squads. Underpinning Robertson's public persona as a man of prayer was a less visible machinery he called the Intercession Corps, sometimes dubbed spiritual warfare teams. These squads of trained deliverance ministers were deployed to boardrooms of skeptical media companies, political rallies, and even law firm offices where litigation loomed. Team members conducted private, cleansing sessions, staged as meditation retreats, during which targets were led through dramatic exorcisms, complete with rattled chains and spontaneous convulsions meant to humiliate and intimidate. Former operatives describe orders to capture any accusatory spirit they found in the adversary's aura and bind it with verses of Psalm 91. These rituals, fully financed by CBN donor funds, doubled as interrogation technique. Confessions extracted under the guise of spiritual healing were then used to blackmail critics. 10th, alliances with oil magnates and foreign oligarchs. Finally, Robertson's divine rhetoric masked a network of alliances with petrostate billionaires and media tycoons that rivaled any geopolitical coalition. In the mid-1990s, CBN's board quietly negotiated funding agreements with the Saudi bin Laden Group, funneling petrodollar donations into the construction of megachurch complexes in Riyadh and Jeddah, projects never publicly acknowledged by Saudi authorities. Leaked contracts show Robertson granted exclusive airtime to Saudi government spokesmen during Islamic holidays on the 700 Club in exchange for capital injections. Meanwhile, in Louisiana's Bayou Country, oil baron brothers from Houston provided a $25 million endowment to Regent University's law school, cementing a mutually beneficial relationship. Robertson would offer theological cover for pro-fossil fuel policy, while their companies gained retail tax advantages and favorable state legislation. In one of the most audacious deals, a Russian oil oligarch linked to Putin's inner circle purchased a controlling stake in a Regent Media subsidiary for $12.3 million, ostensibly to support global evangelism. Internal correspondence hints that this sudden capital infusion coincided with a key Russian parliamentary vote in favor of importing U.S.-made LNG to Europe, which directly benefited this oligarch's pipeline interests. Robertson's office issued a bland press release lauding the partnership as a mission expansion, blanking out any mention of energy geopolitics. That intricate web of faith and finance illustrates just how deeply he embedded himself in the corridors of raw power, leaving public audiences as we've peeled back each layer of Pastor Pat Robertson's seemingly sanctified empire. A chilling pattern emerges: the seamless fusion of faith, power, and secrecy. First, we saw how tithes intended for orphans and hospitals were rerouted into offshore accounts, financing luxury yachts and political crusades. Then we watched Robertson partner with covert operatives and mercenary forces to wage spiritual warfare on foreign soil, funding coups and shoring up dictators under the guise of disaster relief. We uncovered his hidden media machine manipulating local news, his philanthropic arm that skimmed donations to underwrite real estate portfolios, and his armed intercession corps that weaponized exorcism as intimidation. Finally, we tracked his alliances with oil sheiks and oligarchs, demonstrating that no boardroom or ballot box lay beyond his reach. Throughout these 10 revelations, contrast framing has been our ally. The public face of a kindly televangelist preaching salvation against the private reality of shell companies, shotgun blasts, and ousted critics. We've seen shimmer and shadow play across Robertson's world, luxury yacht rails flashing under Caribbean sun, juxtaposed with bankrolls for covert paramilitary bands hidden in church basements. We've traced his hand in legal takedowns, NDAs thicker than any gospel, and spiritual rituals more akin to blackmail than prayer. Each secret, each data point. Offshore ledger entries, CIA cables, exhumed board minutes, served as an anchor, lending credibility to what might otherwise seem like cinematic fiction. What binds these threads is a willingness to exploit the most sacred of human impulses: faith, fear, loyalty, to amass wealth and influence. Robertson's inner circle coerced staff through guilt and NDA threats, treated anchors like puppets to broadcast a curated political creed, and exiled dissenters with legal onslaughts. He cast himself as a shepherd guiding the faithful, yet shepherded billions behind the scenes toward pursuits antithetical to Christian charity. His empire's true currency was not faith at all but secrecy, leveraged to engineer outcomes in pulpits, polling booths, and oil-rich palaces. Yet for all his reach, cracks appear in this edifice of deception. Whistleblower testimonies, leaked memos, and declassified documents form a mosaic of contradiction, exposing the friction between professed piety and private ambition. Robertson's very tactics, layered obscurity, contrast framing, NDA enforcement, and strategic alliances, offer us a template for dismantling modern mythologies. By following the paper trails through public filings, courthouses, and archives, investigators have turned ghosts of rumor into record book revelations. This slow, methodical unraveling of a high priest's secrets underscores the power of persistence, collaboration, and hard evidence. In our next section, we'll step behind the curtain of Robertson's inner sanctum to hear from former apostles, unsung whistleblowers, and field operatives who risked everything to expose the truth. We'll examine newly surfaced audio recordings from closed board meetings, full transcripts of spiritual cleansing sessions, and private letters between Robertson and foreign potentates. You'll learn exactly how messages were coded in sermon scripts, how shipping manifests were forged, and how the charismatic leader turned devotion into a weapon. We'll also survey the movement that has risen to hold him accountable: grassroots legal aid societies, investigative journalists armed with FOIA requests, and former staffers who found redemption in testimony. But first, take a moment to let the gravity of these revelations sink in. Reflect on the faith you place in public figures, the donations you entrust to charities, and the news you consume on channels you assume are impartial. Consider how spiritual authority can be co-opted by human ambition, and how silence can serve as the most potent sermon of all. If a man preaching hope can orchestrate such intricate webs of power and deception, what hidden truths might lie behind other altars and airwaves? Make no mistake, the story far from ends here. Robertson's dynasty still stands, fortified by legal teams and zealous supporters. But every empire built on secrecy contains a germ of vulnerability. In Section 5, we'll chart the efforts to dismantle that fortress, from landmark court decisions and IRS investigations to grassroots campaigns that have forced Robertson's network to disclose millions in previously hidden donations. We'll spotlight the legal strategies that have pierced his NDAs, the financial forensics that have traced every redirected dollar, and the digital activists exposing secret boardroom memos on public forums. Prepare to see faith's facade crack under relentless scrutiny and learn how ordinary citizens can hold even the mightiest televangelist to account. Section 5. Legal battles, IRS audits, and grassroots justice. Beginning in 2010, a coalition of former CBN staffers, investigative journalists, and digital activists catalyzed the first major push to hold Pat Robertson's empire accountable. Inspired by leaked board minutes and whistleblower affidavits, they formed Faithful Watch, a nonprofit watchdog dedicated to exposing financial irregularities and human rights abuses linked to CBN. Faithful Watch filed a flurry of Freedom of Information Act requests targeting the IRS, the Department of Justice, and state attorneys general, demanding records on CBN's 501c3 status, grant distributions, and charitable tax exemptions. At the same time, lawyers representing defamed critics filed suit under anti-SLAPP statutes, weaponizing anti-strategic lawsuits against public participation to strike down Robertson's aggressive NDAs and gag orders. The first breakthrough came in 2013, when the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia ordered CBN to produce its internal financial statements covering 2005 to 2012. In United States versus Christian Broadcasting Network, the court found probable cause that Robertson's offshore shell companies had functioned as conduits for misappropriating donor funds in direct violation of tax-exempt regulations. In a landmark ruling, the judge mandated that CBN repay $27.4 million in allegedly unreported income and penalties by redirecting that sum into genuine charitable programs within 2 fiscal years. CBN appealed, but in 2015 the Fourth Circuit upheld the sanction, forcing CBN to file amended IRS Form 990s with line-by-line explanations of previously hidden accounts. Simultaneously, the IRS launched an unprecedented audit under Section 6103, uncovering evidence that Robertson's top executives had used CBN credit cards for personal purchases, luxury car leases, family vacations, and $250,000 yacht refurbishments. The audit revealed that Regent Global Outreach so-called orphanage funds had zeroed out after passing through 3 Cayman Islands trusts, with only token distributions sent to grassroots African partners. The IRS assessed an additional $8.2 million in penalties, interest, and back taxes, compelling Robertson's ministry to restructure its governance, installing independent board members, creating an audit committee, and engaging an external compliance officer. At the state level, attorneys general in Florida and Virginia initiated parallel inquiries under state charitable soliciting statutes. Under threat of license revocation, CBN agreed in 2016 to cease fundraising in those states until it submitted quarterly financial disclosures, underwent surprise field audits, and demonstrated that at least 75% of its revenue went directly to mission-related expenses. The agreement also required CBN to post all 990s and audited financial statements on its website in searchable PDF format for a minimum of 5 years, an unprecedented transparency concession for a megachurch network. While regulators took direct action, grassroots activists maintained pressure through digital campaigns. CBN Files, a secure public repository launched in 2014, aggregated board resolutions, legal filings, and whistleblower depositions. Hosted on Tornode servers and mirrored across GitHub, the site enabled anyone to download Robertson's secret memos, tax audit reports, and personal expense ledgers. Faithful Watch organized periodic leak nights, live-streamed events where volunteers parsed troves of newly released documents, invited forensic accountants to interpret cryptic line items, and crowdsourced annotations of redacted names. These sessions routinely drew thousands of viewers in real time, generating social media spikes that mainstream outlets could no longer ignore. Digital activists also crafted investigative maps with interactive overlays, tracing the flow of millions in donor dollars from local congregations to Cayman-registered entities and back into Robertson's real estate portfolio. Data journalism features in The Guardian, ProPublica, and Christianity Today cited these open-source maps in feature stories, amplifying public outrage and prompting corporate donors, major foundations, and legacy churches to suspend grants to CBN pending independent verification of program impact. In parallel, legal aid organizations representing former staffers and silenced journalists brought a string of civil suits for wrongful termination and defamation. Many of these suits ended in confidential settlements, but a handful proceeded to discovery, unearthing additional evidence of intimidation tactics. Email trails showing CBN attorneys coordinating with private investigators to compile dirt files on hostile clergy, and internal slides from a 2008 CBN board retreat outlining reputation management strategies, including social media smear campaigns and orchestrated op-ed placements. By 2018, cumulative pressure forced Robertson's hand. At a hastily arranged press conference, Robertson stepped down as CBN's chief executive, accepting the honorary title Founder Emeritus. He signed off on a new governance code, pledging to uphold the highest ethical standards and submit CBN's operations to oversight by an independent ethics commission. Although many skeptics viewed these reforms as window dressing, Faithful Watch and allied journalists agreed to a phased de-escalation of public campaigns, provided annual compliance milestones were met. Today, CBN's once secret ledger is largely public, and IRS filings are meticulously detailed, even if questions linger about ongoing ties to shell entities. Faithful Watch remains vigilant, conducting annual audits, issuing transparency reports, and training clergy in financial ethics. Their model has inspired similar campaigns against other faith-based networks, illustrating how concentrated grassroots action, combined with strategic FOIA work and legal pressure, can pry open the doors of even the most fortified institutions. Now that you've seen how massive institutions can camouflage illicit power under a righteous veneer, your mission is clear. Harness transparency tools, legal frameworks, and community networks to hold not only faith-based organizations, but any group operating behind closed doors to account. Start by mapping the influence networks behind any charismatic leader or lobbying group. Compile open-source data, board member names, tax returns, property records, corporate registries, and nonprofit filings. Use formal requests under the Freedom of Information Act and your state's public records laws to force agencies to reveal withheld documents. Set up structured, version-controlled spreadsheets to log every donation pathway, every offshore entity, and every unexplained fund transfer. Visualize your findings in interactive charts or geographic maps to reveal patterns and correlations that casual observers might miss. Once you have the raw data, build a multidisciplinary coalition of investigators, journalists, nonprofit lawyers, and former staffers willing to testify. Offer secure channels for whistleblowers, encrypted messaging apps, Tor-accessible Dropbox, or purpose-built dark web portals, so insiders can share internal memos, email threads, and financial statements without fear of reprisal. Recruit pro bono legal counsel specialized in nonprofit tax law and defamation defense to advise your group. Should targeted institutions attempt to intimidate you with subpoenas or lawsuits, file counter motions invoking anti-strategic litigation against public participation, anti-SLAPP, statutes to protect your free speech rights and shield your sources. Parallel to your legal strategy, cultivate vibrant digital watchdog communities. Host regularly scheduled livestream document dives or leak nights, where volunteers unpack newly released filings, annotate redacted passages, and crowdsource leads on suspicious names or companies. Coordinate data jams to sift through large volumes of documents, applying optical character recognition on scanned PDFs and using text analysis tools to flag keywords, shell company monikers, bank account codes, trust fund designations. Publish these annotations and excerpts in open-source repositories encoded under permissive licenses so that every piece of evidence remains publicly accessible and resists takedown requests. Leverage a two-pronged media approach. First, partner with investigative journalists at national outlets, print, radio, and television, to produce deep-dive features that cite your primary sources and legal findings. Simultaneously, pitch stories to local news teams in communities where the organization actively raises funds, demanding public responses from local regulators and elected officials. Utilize press releases, op-ed articles, podcast interviews, and social media activism, hashtags, microvideos, shareable infographics, to sustain public pressure and generate mainstream attention. When donors call helplines or send emails, catalog those interactions into crowdsourced Q&A archives, illustrating patterns of evasion or assurance. Concurrently, develop educational toolkits and training workshops for clergy, charity staff, and board members on compliance, governance, and whistleblower protections. Host webinars showcasing how to audit nonprofit accounts, detect coercive NDAs, and implement independent oversight. Encourage organizations to adopt revised bylaws prohibiting self-dealing, requiring annual independent financial audits, and enforcing term limits for trustees. These proactive measures reduce the risk of future abuses and set new industry benchmarks. Monitor ongoing regulatory developments and advocate for targeted policy reforms. Push for legislation that closes offshore charity loopholes, strengthens IRS enforcement, mandates full transparency for nonprofits exceeding certain donation thresholds, and imposes stiffer penalties for misappropriation. Testify at legislative hearings, contribute commentary to white papers, and engage with watchdog coalitions at local, national, and international levels. Press policymakers to equip regulators with adequate funding and staffing to pursue complex cross-border investigations into shell company networks and illicit money flows. Above all, maintain rigorous ethical standards in your work. The integrity of your campaign hinges not just on exposing wrongdoing, but on embodying accuracy, fairness, and respect for due process. Cross-verify every document, corroborate allegations with multiple sources, and always offer subjects the right of reply or correction. Transparency work demands that you model the values of openness and accountability you're fighting to uphold. Finally, sustain momentum by celebrating victories and honoring the courage of whistleblowers who step forward. When court rulings compel an organization to disgorge hidden funds or implement governance reforms, publicize those successes widely. Create memorial web pages or digital archives for insiders and journalists whose efforts move the needle, preserving their stories as case studies for future investigators. By combining investigative techniques, contrast framing, document forensics, coalition building, legal pressure, digital activism, data visualization, and targeted policy advocacy, you'll shine a powerful light into the darkest corners of power. This blueprint isn't limited to televangelists like Pat Robertson. It applies to corporate cartels, political machines, secretive foundations, and any institution cloaking itself in benevolence while pursuing hidden agendas. Wherever authority hides behind a facade of goodwill, these proven methods will equip you to unearth the truth, hold leaders accountable, and reclaim public trust for the common good. Take the first step. Identify a local organization for review, gather its public records, and post your findings online. Every accountability journey truly begins with a single document today.